But I want to see it through. I need to see that through. I see her as a monster. I looked down at her hands. I could actually see dried blood and tissue in her cuticles and under her nails.
Terre Haute, Indiana, January 13th, 2021. In the dark, early hours of the morning, the United States carried out a sentence it had not enforced on a woman in nearly 7 decades. At 1:31 a.m., Lisa Montgomery was executed by lethal injection. Her crime was so shocking that it left even seasoned investigators horrified, and her final moments ignited a nationwide debate over justice, mercy, and mental illness. Lisa's case was unlike most others. On one side, she was the only woman on federal death row, convicted of one of the most gruesome crimes in modern American history. On the other, her life story was a portrait of abuse, trauma, and untreated illness, raising questions about how much of her fate was written long before the crime was ever committed. On December 16, 2004, in the small town of Skidmore, Missouri, a young mother named Bobbie Jo Stinnett was found murdered in her own home. Lisa Montgomery, then 36 years old, had strangled the 23-year-old dog breeder and cut her unborn baby from the womb, fleeing with the child as though it were her own. Within a single day, law enforcement tracked her down, rescuing the infant and arresting Lisa for a crime so brutal that it shocked the conscience of the nation. For years, appeals wound their way through the courts. Her defense attorneys argued she was mentally ill, suffering from psychosis and a lifetime of abuse that had left her permanently scarred. But prosecutors held firm, describing her actions as calculated and merciless. In the end, the justice system made its choice. Lisa Montgomery's execution was more than the end of a legal case. It became a symbol, sparking headlines across the world. Some called her a monster. Others saw her as a broken woman, failed by the system. What is certain is this: her crime, her final meal, and her last words have secured her place in American history. Lisa Montgomery was born on February 27, 1968, in Kansas, into a world already scarred by dysfunction. From the moment she entered life, the odds were stacked against her. Her mother, Judy Shaughnessy, struggled with mental instability and substance abuse. Her father abandoned the family when Lisa was still very young, leaving her in the care of a home marked by neglect and chaos. By the age of 11, Lisa's world had turned into a nightmare. Court documents and later testimony revealed that she was repeatedly sexually abused by her stepfather, Jack Kleiner, who built a shed on the family's property and used it as a prison of terror. Lisa confided in her mother, but instead of protection, she was met with indifference and at times, outright cruelty. Her mother not only failed to intervene, but reportedly condoned and enabled the abuse. The trauma left deep psychological scars. Lisa developed signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, and borderline personality disorder. Experts later noted that she also suffered brain damage from fetal alcohol syndrome, stemming from her mother's drinking during pregnancy. These conditions created a fragile, fractured psyche, leaving her unable to cope with reality in healthy ways. By her teenage years, Lisa was already withdrawing from the world, slipping into fantasy and isolation. Teachers described her as distant and disconnected, while peers often mocked her for being different. At 18, she dropped out of high school, escaping one broken home only to find herself in a series of unstable relationships. She married twice, with both marriages marked by volatility, domestic violence, and more trauma. She gave birth to 4 children but eventually underwent sterilization, something she concealed from others, including her second husband. That decision would play a chilling role in her future crime, as she later faked pregnancies to maintain relationships and sympathy from those around her. Lisa Montgomery's early life was not simply troubled. It was catastrophic. The abuse, neglect, and untreated mental illness formed a foundation of suffering that she carried into adulthood. And while many endure hardship without committing violence, in Lisa's case, the darkness of her past collided with her unraveling mind, setting the stage for a crime so shocking it would make her infamous. The crime: Skidmore, Missouri, December 16, 2004. In a small rural town where neighbors left doors unlocked and everyone knew each other, the unimaginable happened. 23-year-old Bobbie Jo Stinnett, a dog breeder known for her kind heart and love of raising rat terriers, was found brutally murdered in her own home. She was 8 months pregnant, preparing excitedly to welcome her first child. That morning, Bobbie Jo exchanged cheerful emails with fellow breeders on an online forum dedicated to terriers. Among those messages was one from Darlene Fisher, an alias created by Lisa Montgomery. Lisa had contacted Bobbie under the pretense of buying a puppy, arranging to meet her at the house that afternoon. But Lisa's real plan had nothing to do with dogs. Montgomery, then 36, had been faking pregnancies for years. Her second husband believed she was expecting, unaware she'd undergone sterilization years earlier. For Lisa, maintaining the illusion meant everything. She was determined to present a newborn as her own, no matter the cost. When Lisa arrived at the modest home on West Elm Street, Bobbie Jo welcomed her inside. The two women likely spoke about puppies before Lisa's ruse took its deadly turn. At some point, Lisa looped a rope around Bobbie Jo's neck, strangling her until she collapsed. With chilling precision, Lisa retrieved a kitchen knife she had brought with her and cut open Bobbie Jo's abdomen, removing the unborn baby girl. She fled the scene with the infant, leaving Bobbie Jo dying on the floor of her home. Later that afternoon, Bobbie Jo's mother, Becky Harper, arrived and discovered the horrific scene. Her 911 call, filled with panic and disbelief, captured the sheer horror of what she saw. Her daughter lying unconscious, the baby gone. Emergency responders rushed to the house, but it was too late. Bobbie Jo had been killed in one of the most shocking and disturbing crimes the state of Missouri had ever seen. The brutality stunned investigators, but it was the missing newborn that transformed the case into a desperate race against time. A mother was dead, and somewhere out there, her stolen baby was alive, depending on whether police could find her in time. Investigation and evidence bookmark. The murder of Bobbie Jo Stinnett immediately launched one of the fastest and most intense manhunts in Missouri's history. Investigators knew that somewhere out there was not only a killer, but also a newborn baby whose life hung in the balance. Authorities began by retracing Bobbie Jo's final hours. The breakthrough came from her computer. Detectives discovered emails exchanged with a supposed dog breeder named Darlene Fisher. The address was quickly traced back to Lisa Montgomery of Melbourne, Kansas, just across the state line. Neighbors reported seeing Lisa with a newborn shortly after Bobbie Jo's murder. She told people she had gone into labor unexpectedly and delivered the child alone at home. To investigators, the story was suspicious, especially after learning Lisa had undergone sterilization years earlier and could not possibly have been pregnant. Cell phone records, witness statements, and online message logs all pointed in the same direction. By the evening of December 17, 2004, less than 24 hours after the murder, federal agents and local police closed in on Lisa's farmhouse. Inside, they found Lisa cradling the baby girl. The infant was alive, unharmed, and later confirmed by DNA testing to be Bobbie Jo's daughter. Forensic evidence further tied Lisa to the crime. A rope consistent with the strangulation was recovered, along with the bloody knife she had carried with her. Witnesses recalled her telling inconsistent stories about her supposed pregnancy, and investigators pieced together her plan. She had been building the lie for months, waiting for the chance to steal a child and present it as her own. Lisa Montgomery was arrested on the spot and charged with federal kidnapping, resulting in death, a crime punishable by execution. The swiftness of the investigation brought some relief. The baby, later named Victoria Jo Stinnett, was safely returned to her father. But for Bobbie Jo's family, that comfort could never erase the brutality of her death. The case was now airtight. The question left for the courts was not whether Lisa had killed, but whether she would live or die for it. Trial and sentencing. Lisa Montgomery's trial began in 2007 in Kansas City, Missouri, and quickly became one of the most watched federal murder cases in years. From the outset, prosecutors and defense attorneys painted two starkly different portraits of the same woman. The prosecution described Lisa as a cold and calculating killer. They laid out her months of planning, from creating fake identities online to tracking Bobbie Jo Stinnett through puppy forums. They emphasized that Lisa brought the rope and knife with her that December afternoon. Clear signs of premeditation. For the government, the case was simple. Montgomery wanted a baby, and she was willing to kill to get one. The defense, however, told a very different story. They argued Lisa was deeply mentally ill, the product of a childhood marked by unimaginable abuse and trauma. Experts testified that she suffered from bipolar disorder, complex PTSD, and brain damage from fetal alcohol syndrome. They explained that Lisa had long experienced delusions, and in her fractured state of mind, she believed she was carrying out a desperate plan to save herself by presenting a child as her own. Jurors listened to harrowing testimony from Lisa's family about her upbringing, sexual abuse by her stepfather, her mother's indifference, and a lifetime of mental breakdowns. But despite the tragedy of her past, the jury could not overlook the brutality of her actions and the loss of Bobbie Jo's life. On October 22, 2007, the jury found Lisa Montgomery guilty of federal kidnapping, resulting in death. In the penalty phase, after weighing her mental health claims against the calculated nature of the crime, the jury recommended death. The judge formally sentenced her to death by lethal injection, making Lisa the only woman on federal death row at the time. For years afterward, appeals wound through the courts. Her attorneys argued that executing a severely mentally ill woman violated constitutional protections, while prosecutors insisted the sentence was just. The legal battle became a tug-of-war over not only Lisa's fate, but also over broader questions about justice, mental illness, and the death penalty itself. Final days on death row. After her 2007 conviction, Lisa Montgomery was transferred to the Federal Medical Center in Carswell, Texas, a facility that houses female inmates with special medical or mental health needs. There, she would remain for more than a decade, the only woman on federal death row. Her attorneys continued to fight her sentence, filing appeals that centered on her history of abuse and her severe mental illness. They argued she lived in a constant state of delusion, suffering from hallucinations and dissociation that made her incapable of fully understanding her actions. In their view, executing her would not be justice, but cruelty. But those appeals repeatedly failed. In 2019, the federal government announced it would resume executions after a 17-year pause, and Lisa's name appeared on the list. Her case became one of 13 federal executions carried out during the final months of the Trump administration. For her lawyers, the announcement set off a desperate race against time. In early January 2021, with just days before the scheduled execution, her defense team launched multiple emergency appeals. They asked the courts and even the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene, arguing Lisa's mental illness was so severe that she could not comprehend the reason for her execution. Psychologists described her as psychotic, detached from reality, and unable to process what was happening. For a brief moment, it seemed the appeals might succeed. A federal judge temporarily halted the execution to review her mental state. But in the late hours of January 12, 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court lifted the stay, clearing the way for the federal government to proceed. That night, Lisa Montgomery was transferred to the Terre Haute Federal Prison in Indiana, where executions are carried out. The weight of years of appeals had come to an end. Her attorneys described her as quiet and resigned, still struggling with hallucinations, while prison officials moved forward with preparations for her final hours. Her death sentence was now certain, and the world's attention turned to her final meal and last words, moments that would define the end of her story. Final meal and last words. On the evening of January 12, 2021, hours before her execution, Lisa Montgomery was given the same choice as every prisoner facing death: the chance to select a final meal. She requested a simple plate of Kentucky Fried Chicken, fried potatoes, buttered bread, and a Coke. For her attorneys and observers, the request reflected not indulgence but resignation, an unremarkable choice for a woman whose life had been anything but ordinary. As midnight passed, Lisa was led into the execution chamber at the Terre Haute Federal Prison. Witnesses described her demeanor as quiet and subdued. After years of appeals and frantic last-minute efforts by her legal team, she seemed to accept what was about to happen. When asked if she had any final words, Lisa simply replied, "No." Those would be her last spoken words on Earth. At 1:31 a.m., January 13, 2021, the lethal injection was administered. Within minutes, she was pronounced dead. The moment marked a grim milestone. Lisa Montgomery became the first woman executed by the U.S. federal government in nearly 70 years. For Bobbie Jo Stinnett's family, it was the end of a 16-year battle for justice. For Lisa's defenders, it was a moment of sorrow, as they believed the state had taken the life of a woman who had been profoundly broken long before her crime. Her last meal, her refusal to speak, and the sterile finality of the chamber stood in stark contrast to the chaos and violence of the crime that had brought her there. Aftermath and reflection. With Lisa Montgomery's execution complete, the focus shifted back to the people most deeply affected. The family of Bobbie Jo Stinnett. Her daughter, Victoria Jo, who was safely rescued as an infant on the day of the crime, has grown up away from the spotlight, raised in private by her father's family. For them, Lisa's death closed a legal chapter. But it could never erase the wound left by Bobbie Jo's murder. For Lisa's defense team and supporters, her execution was seen very differently. They argued that she should never have been put to death, pointing to her long history of sexual abuse, brain damage, and severe mental illness. In their eyes, Lisa was not just a killer, she was also a victim of a lifetime of cruelty and neglect. Her case reignited national debates about the death penalty, mental health, and whether justice should be defined by retribution or mercy. The public remained divided. Some viewed her execution as justice served, a necessary punishment for a crime that was as brutal as it was premeditated. Others saw it as a dark failure of compassion, a moment when the system chose to punish rather than to heal. What cannot be denied is that Lisa Montgomery's story remains one of the most haunting in modern American history. From a childhood shaped by violence and neglect, to a crime that tore apart a young family, to the final words of a woman who chose silence as she faced her end, her life and death continue to raise difficult questions. Her execution was more than just the punishment of one individual. It was a mirror held up to society's struggle with crime, trauma, and accountability. And in the end, it leaves us with a chilling truth. Justice and tragedy often walk hand in hand, and when the state ends a life, the echoes of that decision are felt far beyond the walls of a prison.